Hey, what's up guys? Thank you for joining me for another video. This is Dr. LaHue, and today we're talking about how to stay married. And I found an interesting magazine a while back called The Science of Marriage, and it came out this year earlier. I think it was in about May. And I've been reading through it, some interesting articles. Of course, it's not from a Christian perspective, but it can still be very helpful to us. And in one of these articles, it was talking about, the expectations that we have for marriage are higher than they've ever been. And people, are focused on, getting their needs met, and have these unrealistic sometimes expectations. Gone are the days where we thought of marriage as, a relationship between two people to have children and to establish a family. I mean, the expectations are much higher than that now, than just compatibility. People, can go online and they can with technology assisted, virtually look through maybe 10, 20, 30, hundreds of pictures of potential mates. And they're kind of like lining all those up to see which one do they think will give them the best deal. So getting married, is easier now than it's ever been. The laws and the restrictions and the hoops and the hurdles that you go through to get married are, easier than they've ever been. And separation is also easier than it's ever been. There's less stigma attached to couples splitting up. In fact, instead of feeling ashamed for splitting up, the shame is now associated to those who would stay in a loveless marriage or a an unhappy marriage. So, if you're staying in a marriage that's difficult, you might have friends and relatives that, kind of make you feel like you ought to be ashamed for like being so stupid to stick it out. So we're definitely swimming up against, the current in this day and age. The war that was fought in the past was to be able to break out of marriage if you weren't happy. That was the goal. The challenge is to overcome the stigma of breaking out of a marriage. And now I think that's no longer the challenge. The challenge now is, how do we stay together? With so many marriages splitting up around us and so many marriages breaking up, and there really isn't much difference between marriages, in the church and marriages outside the church, or marriages among Christians and marriages, among people who don't claim any kind of religious affiliation. There's not a lot of statistical difference, So the real challenge now is, not how do I find the right partner, or how do I, break it off if things aren't going well. But the real challenge that I think each of us are facing is, how do we make it for 50 years? How do we stick it out? How do we get along? How do we overcome the barriers and the obstacles? And realize, one of the great barriers is the one you bring into the marriage is just your expectations. If you have what would be considered unrealistic expectations as to what this marriage is going to give you, then there's a good chance those aren't going to be met, and you're going to be disappointed. And disappointment is going to lead to frustration and contempt. And that's going to maybe motivate you or cause you to think, well, maybe I need to be done. Maybe this isn't working out. This is too much frustration. This is too much, conflict. And we're not getting along. We're not, close like we used to be. And so maybe it's best if we just end this and just say that the love or the romance is gone. So the real challenge, for this generation is, how do we stick it out? How do we overcome? How do we overcome, we don't want to go to the humdrum, dry, boring marriages of our grandparents, but on the other hand, we want to have realistic expectations as to what, marriage is going to be. So I thought this article was good, this first article. I'll look through these and we'll talk about them in these videos. But one of the things that they noted was in our culture now that there's a lot of older people getting divorced, or what you might say empty nest divorce. We raised the kids, we stuck it out, we did the right thing, and now, we've grown apart. The kids are gone, so why do we keep pretending? Maybe we ought to just call it quits and, live the next 20 years of our life, try and be happy. And so there's a lot of maybe second marriages among older couples, or the empty nest divorce that's unusual. In fact, it says older people, divorce rates are up among this group. They've doubled as of 2017, a report in 2017, that they've doubled among people past age 50 over the past 25 years. So that's pretty significant change. Older people, saying that, they've stuck it out long enough and they're not taking it anymore. They're done. Social media has had an effect on marriages. It's easier to maybe connect with people other than your spouse. And that's good. You want to be able to connect with family and friends and all that. But maybe it's become so easy that you don't necessarily need to depend on your spouse as your primary source of connection. So you could lean outside your marriage, I guess, and through social media, through FaceTime and Skype and Facebook and all these other great resources we have, you could maybe develop too close of a relationship and become too dependent, too chummy, I guess, with people maybe from your past, old flames or old girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, or people that maybe you see get divorced, somebody that you were friends with and that you had an inclination toward, but of course they were married and you were married, but now you see they got divorced and they're single again. And so what might start out as, just friendships could develop into something, that you don't intend, that could maybe pull you away from the marriage. And the reality is, guys, Willard Harley's proved this in his research of his needs, her needs, is the people that are meeting your needs, whether those are conversation, whether those are needs for affection or whatever they are. People who are meeting those needs for you, that you allow to meet those needs, you're going to start to feel a romantic interest in those people, and it's not necessarily something that you want to happen. It's not something necessarily that you are expecting to happen. But as people, pour into your life, and if you've shut yourself off in contempt, against your spouse, and now you're reaching out to people external of the marriage, and they're pouring into you and showing interest in you, what's going to follow is very possibly, some kind of romantic interest within you that you're going to assume is love. You're going to say, oh, I fell in love with this person. When really what's going on is the person's just meeting your needs, and it feels good when somebody meets your needs, and you're going to find yourself drawn to that person. So with all the different avenues that people have to connect with one another nowadays, I think this problem is only increased or exacerbated. So I think the stigma associated with separating and the stigma associated with divorce is less than it's ever been, and there's a stigma now associated with those that stick it out. Like you deserve to be unhappy because you need to you're holding on to these old ideas or ideals about marriage, and so that's your own. You're just, if you want to suffer, then that's just your problem. I think is the way maybe people might think about it. So one of the things that they point out, in this article is that one of the most dangerous, destructive forces in your marriage is something I've already mentioned, is contempt. And so there needs to be within you in your marriage, this sense that we're going to avoid contempt at all costs. Meaning, if I find myself getting frustrated or angry or upset with my spouse, then I need to either just get over that, or I need to talk about it, or I need to work through it, or I need to, Whatever I got to do to get to forgiveness and to get that bitterness out, because once it gets in, it just starts to ruin the relationship. And the contempt, can be expressed in the way you talk to each other. It can be expressed in the way you talk about one another. It may cause you to withdraw from the marriage. It may cause you to become very antagonistic to the marriage. But they say, just listen to how it's said. Contempt can set off a lethal chain reaction. It kills vulnerability. In other words, we don't want to be vulnerable or intimate anymore. I mean, we may go through the motions, but we kind of like put ourselves away in a safe, protective layer, and we don't want to be vulnerable. And they say vulnerable is a prerequisite for intimacy. Without intimacy, commitment becomes a grind. Okay, and maybe think about like with kids and their parents, when they don't feel loved by their parents, then they're just obeying. And that obedience, becomes, a discipline, but there has to be love in addition to the obedience that a child, shows to their parents. Otherwise, it just becomes an opportunity for rebellion. If there's no love, if it's just following the rules, and eventually the child's going to become disheartened and probably rebel against his parents. And so in a marriage, if there's contempt, and contempt is allowed to grow and it's not dealt with, and we don't have communication, we don't sit down and talk it through and get to, a settlement and get to a resolution, then people are going to start to shut off. They're going to start to close their spirit, you might say, against one another and not be intimate. And intimate just means letting yourself be open, letting yourself be open to each other. And so that commitment then becomes a grind. And, it's hard for us in this day and age to stick with things that are difficult. And if your marriage becomes difficult, then what happens is people just say, I think it's over. I think we should just be honest. They'll say it like that, that we should just be honest and admit what it is. So, and think about this, remember, what breeds contempt? Familiarity, right? Familiarity breeds contempt. That's the old saying. And so I think one of the things that happens in marriage is we become too familiar. In other words, not that we're spending too much time together, because I don't think most couples are spending too much time together, but I think you could say it like this: we start taking each other for granted. We start minimizing the value and importance of one another, and we start taking each other for granted. And that familiarity we have with each other starts to breed contempt for each other. So we find it maybe hard to apologize and to forgive, and so disagreements, start to develop. One of the things they noticed in the study was that, and that's what this is, it's an article about, some studies that have been done among couples. The most successful couples are those that embrace each other's interests. That's good. That's really good, because some of the things my wife's interested in, I'm not. And I know some of the things that I'm interested in, she's not. I mean, but the thing is we always show interest. We always demonstrate interest. And so she'll tell me about, something she's learning or something that she's developing in her work. And I'll stand there and I'll listen to it and I ask questions because I'm interested in her. And I think sometimes, we feel like, well, if I'm not interested in what they're doing, then why do I have to stand here and listen to this? Or if I'm not interested in the subject, then I'm not going to stand here and listen to it. I've got other things to do. But see, this is, think about this. This is so important is, are you interested in your marriage? Are you interested in the happiness, in being faithful to your commitment and overcoming the odds? If you're interested in your marriage, then you've got to be interested in the person. You got to be interested in your spouse. And to be interested in your spouse means you're going to be interested in the things that are interesting to them. Here's the sentence right here. Obvious idea that actually works, number 2, is to find shared interests, which can help offset the changes that relationships go through. The most successful couples began to embrace one another's interests. And I think one of the things we do in marriage is we kind of say, well, you have your interest, you have your craft room with your stuff, and I've got my, you know, my magazine collection or my whatever, and I got my room, and then we go our separate ways, and we kind of do that mentally, and maybe to our own peril. So learning to get interested in what the other person is. That's what you do with your kids. I mean, that's what we do with our kids is, you know, I don't care anything about Pokemon or Minecraft or, you know, any of that kind of thing, but my son does. And so I'll at least talk to him about it and let him tell me about it, even though I'm never going to master that information because I'm not interested in it. But I'm interested in him, and so I'll show interest in that subject because I'm interested in my relationship with my son. So I think it's very similar in our marriage. Sometimes the obvious things, guys, are the things we miss, and that's why I think this is so helpful. So think of things that we like to do together, or maybe start, you know, try some things. Just start simple, you know, maybe just go for walks or riding bikes or, you know, something simple that we could do together that we enjoy. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I hope it's helpful to you. I hope it's encouraging to you. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. Share this video with somebody you think will be helped by it. And make sure you're present to life. All right, guys. Take care and blessings.